Kiriko with Carrie Kiriko Real Estate, and I'm lucky enough again to have Drew Branyon from Home Team Inspection.
So
And hey, um, how's it been going?
good, good.
Good. Any fun movies you've been watching lately, or fun stuff you've been doing?
Well, I mean, again, like three small kids. At the time of recording this, Easter was this past weekend, and we
Yeah.
did three different egg hunts, and the Easter Bunny came, and so they've been a ball of excited energy, which is fun. But that's about what I got time for.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm just grateful for the weather. The weather's been good, so
Yeah, yep.
yeah, and not doing so much. I have like wanted to, I know I have like such weird things that I'm like, I want to learn how to do this. So I wanted to learn how to play Mahjong. I've wanted to learn since I was like a little kid because I've watched all like the ladies, because I'm from San Francisco. So that was a common game people played.
Sure.
Uh, and so I've been like, so that's what I did. This last weekend I was learning how to play that. Have you ever played?
I've no,
Oh,
I've never played. I'm not a huge board game person. Like family
yeah.
vacations about the only time. But yeah.
Yeah, I see. I grew up playing because I have a big family, so many board games. So I kind of not a huge game player, but that one I wanted to learn how to play. I don't know why. Just I was like, I want to learn how to play this. But anyways, so that's been kind of fun. It actually is pretty fun. It's not too bad. It's kind of it feels like a little bit of pokerish, kind of like when you
Okay.
kind of get down to it. So it's not too bad. But I see him play it in the like if you ever go out to like Vegas, they actually do play it there, in the casino. So it's interesting. Well, today we are going to talk all about crawl spaces, basements, and structural issues, and what people need to look out for, and like why it's so important to have a home inspection. So let's like jump right in. And like, so what are some of the most common issues you see in basements and crawl spaces during your home inspection? We'll just jump into that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the most common thing that we see, especially in crawl spaces, is
Yeah.
high moisture.
Yeah.
And I think, it kind of goes along with everything that we're going to talk about with basement and structures and crawl spaces is
Yeah.
keeping water away from your house and keeping the moisture content low is going to be the biggest key to keeping your house healthy. So, there are, basements are always concerned with foundation cracks.
Yeah.
Crawl spaces have a lot of mold in them. Oftentimes, again, which is all related to moisture. Foundation cracking is usually related to moisture. And there's different kinds of wood things, with cracked joists or just things settling over
Yeah.
time. But the common one and then probably the biggest concern that we see is always surrounding moisture.
Yeah. So, why are crawl spaces and basements? Why is it so important to have a home inspection when you have a crawl space or, a basement?
Well, I mean, like I think, one of the biggest things just get a home inspection in general
Yeah.
is don't know what you're looking at, right? So you need a
Yeah.
trained eye to do it. And, I always think it's a good indication of what our industry can do when my contractor friends call us to go look at properties,
Yeah.
or we have engineers that call us to go look at properties because the way that we look at things is just completely different than a general contractor is going to look at it, right? So we're not the people to fix it. Contractors typically aren't the people to go discover things. They're really good at looking at what's there and how to make it work, right? So I think that's when people are like, oh well, I've got an uncle that is a general contractor, like they may be able to help with a lot of different things, right?
Yeah.
But really their step is to come in on the backside of us. So like crawl space is like, are you really going to get in your crawl space and take a look? Are you gonna look in the basement and realize what's actually there? I mean, I was at a house just this past weekend, and the seller was there, and he was like, "Hey, we've kept really good care of this house, and I didn't get
Yeah.
a home inspection, and but I've bought 10 properties, and I understand everything that's here, and this is built on really solid foundation."
Hmm.
As he's looking over my shoulder, there is a giant foundation crack behind me, and so hidden kind of behind some shelves,
Yeah.
and it's I think you just don't know what you're looking at. And when you've looked at thousands of properties with this kind of eye, I mean, there's not much that a typical, even a professional homeowner,
Yeah.
right? One that's bought 10, 15, 20, 50 properties is going to see that, we're going to see things that they're not, right?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, definitely. And it's really like it's helpful being a realtor and learning from you guys too, because when we go into properties, like there's things I spot right away and I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, okay, when I'm in the basement or I'm in the crawl space that like you're right, general contractors don't even mention them. And like I spot them right away. And it's only because of learning and being with you guys and kind of like digging in and like figuring out and looking, through the inspection and just through your eye, like what to
Yeah.
look for
Well, and
sure.
sometimes, like when you talk about like contractors not mentioning stuff, sometimes it's just
Yeah.
because it's not that big of a deal,
Yeah.
right? And but that's not what you're hiring us for, right? Like
Yeah.
you're hiring us to get the information. And
Yeah.
then yeah, there's gonna be, of a list of 30 things, 20 of them probably are not gonna be that big of a deal. But
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. I get that completely. So, like, what signs should homeowners look for, like, that might indicate structural issues?
so when you're looking structural issues, in terms of like signs that it's happening, if you've got a brick home, especially, which, North Carolina, there's a lot of brick.
Yeah.
You're looking at cracking coming out of the corner of windows and doors.
Hmm.
You're looking for any kind of movement or shifting. So, when you're looking at, the cinder block in a crawl space or in a basement, if things, like if it's supposed to be, I'm trying to get my hands lined
Yeah.
up on camera, but if it starts shifting like that,
Hmm.
or if you get, different kinds of stair cracking or, vertical cracking tends to be a little bit less of a concern until it starts splitting like a V, right? So if it's, bigger than a quarter inch or so wide,
Yeah.
where, you can tell like it's starting to open up on the top as opposed to the bottom, then you know that the house is starting to separate that way. But because concrete's designed to crack, it's going to crack.
Yeah.
Um, but and just because you have cracks at the corners of your windows doesn't mean you have a structural issue, but it may be signs to get something checked out, right?
Yeah.
And those are the things that can be really, really visible to a homeowner.
Yeah. So that kind of leads me into like, and I think we kind of answered this, but maybe maybe we can answer it a little different, like a different way to answer it. Like, so how can someone tell the difference between a cosmetic crack and a structural, crack? Because we kind of were just talking about it, but it's like one of the biggest questions I get when I look, when you're looking at homes, especially before I put them on the market.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's not, it is a judgment call,
Yeah.
right? So I think that's part of it. And,
Yeah.
there are some cracking, like when you have, brick on the outside of a house, like a lot of people don't understand that that brick is actually siding, it's not structural,
Yeah.
right? So when you have cracking on the brick veneer, doesn't necessarily mean that it's a structural concern, right? And also doesn't mean that you shouldn't get a structural engineer because obviously if it's cracking, it's moving some way and you brick falling off your house, right? But
Yeah.
when we're looking at things and kind of what we teach our inspectors is, if you have baseline cracking, the corner cracking coming off, or the vertical cracking, if it's an eighth of an inch under,
Okay.
in width, then it's probably not a concern.
Okay.
Where we typically recommend a structural engineer is any type of horizontal cracking, especially in a basement, because
Yes.
what that means is that water or soil, which typically it's putting pressure on there from water, but it's usually water pressure up against the wall
Hmm.
that's causing it to bend and bow, which is what's causing that horizontal cracking. So we've been told by structural engineers that anytime we see horizontal cracking to refer it to them automatically. Um,
Okay.
and like I've got horizontal cracking in my basement and it hasn't moved in 8 years. So like, it's not necessarily that, it's going to be a big concern, but it is something to get looked at. If you're, the structural concern that gets tough is you don't know what you're looking at underneath,
Yeah.
right? So, like if you have cracking in your drywall, It doesn't mean a structural concern. And the only way to really know that it's a structural concern is to understand how things are bearing and what underneath of that structure looks like,
Hmm.
which to me should only be judged by a trained eye, right? We can look at indications of it. General contractors can look at indications of it. But typically that's what we're looking at is eighth of an inch or less. Probably not a structural concern. If it's a house that you own currently, take pictures with a ruler,
Yeah.
take a picture of it, take a picture of how long the crack is, how wide the crack is, so that way you have it documented,
Hmm.
and check it maybe once every 6 months or so to make sure that that crack is not continuing to grow,
Yeah.
right? Continuing to grow, it means that there's an ongoing, and houses are moving, breathing things, so like things are going to continue to move and adjust. And like when you hear the popping in your house at night, like that's what that is.
Yeah.
But it's things are going to continue to move, but you want to make sure that you're not the crack's not opening up, it's not getting longer in length.
Yeah.
um, and you can also repair it to monitor stuff. We typically say, like, if we see a concrete or a brick repair
Hmm.
and it's starting to open back up, that tells us that it's also a concern, right? So I mean, that's a really long-winded way to
Yeah.
say most cracking that we see is not a structural concern. It's not that big of a concern, but continued monitoring and making sure that you're keeping an eye on it consistently over time is going to help make sure that you don't have a big structural issue 5 years down the road.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And that's why I try to always mention that to everybody. And it sometimes it just is like it may not, like you said, it's not a big deal. You just got to keep an eye on it. And I mean, that's
Yeah.
kind of like my big thing, and that I tell everybody as well. So, what are some red flags in the basement and crawl space that might indicate foundation movement? Like we already kind of talked about it, but just to be like, pretty detailed on that. What do you feel like people need to look at?
Yeah, I mean, if you're a typical homeowner, the things that, I would look at, and it really kind of starts on the outside,
Yeah.
right? So, in terms of long-term maintenance on your home, keeping your gutters clean, gutters or lack of gutters is probably one of the biggest indications of structural concerns. If we
Yeah.
don't see gutters on a house, the chances of there being structural concerns underneath goes way, way up.
Yeah.
So having in making sure that your gutters aren't overflowing,
Yeah.
um, taking a look around the foundation. When we see like dips back toward the foundation, we know that there's been water getting to the foundation, which is what is going to cause that cracking. It's what's going to cause that structure. Older homes are going to have some settling, so I mean, there's going to be things that move over time, but really what you're looking at, like in a crawl space, like structural concerns are typically caused by water and moisture, and are often caused by either termites or wood. When it gets really wet, starts to compress, which can do that, but
Yeah.
also like piers start sinking.
Yeah.
So you get a lot of moisture in a crawl space, and those piers begin to settle. That's what gets you some of those humps in the floors, get you some of the waviness that goes on in the floors. Can be an indication of things. And sometimes, like, that's just the house, right? Like,
Yeah.
so that's the hard part, is like things can look ugly, things can be uneven, they can get out of level. Um, but sometimes like fixing that is a much, much larger concern, because it's going to create more issues than just kind of making sure that things stay where they are.
Yeah. 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 Definitely. And like grading, I always feel like,
Yep.
telling people just just grade your around your house because it'll help it.
Grade around your house, make
Yeah.
sure you don't want like bushes and trees right up against your house, because that can
Yeah.
trap moisture up against it. But
Yeah.
and landscape and having bushes near the house, we recommend at least 18 inches away, but doing that is also going to soak up the moisture too,
Right.
right? So you're going to have a lot less getting to your foundation when you have healthy vegetation around your house, right? Like making sure that you have grass, making sure that you have, mulch or pine straw, and you've got bushes there that are going to help, suck that moisture up and prevent it from getting to your house. So, if you're like new construction, making sure that you're getting landscape when you move in, because new construction, oftentimes when you first move in, is a dumpster fire when it comes to,
Yep.
landscape and
Yeah.
mud and, nothing, everything's washing out because nothing is settled yet. So,
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So we kind of touched on this just a minute ago, but just to go into a little bit more detail, because this is like one of the biggest questions everyone asks me about what causes sagging floors and should a buyer be super concerned about that?
I mean, I think it's worth trying to figure out what's causing that, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
making sure that there's no structural concerns that are causing that.
Hmm.
Houses are heavy,
Yeah.
so and they settle. So over time, as foundation walls settle, so say your foundation walls are sinking at, you know, an eighth of an inch a year or something like that, and just over
Yeah.
time starts going down little by little, and that center beam is staying intact. That's going to cause, the joists to settle down with that foundation wall. It's going to cause that humping, right?
Yeah.
Um, and it's super super common. Like, I mean, I live in a 1960s basement home,
Yeah.
and if you go into a crawl space now, like most load bearing walls are going to sit on top of piers,
Yeah.
right? So like the load bearing points are going to come down, they're going to sit on top of the piers, and that's what's going to support that weight, and that's why you have those big girders and all that stuff too. But in my house, we have one center beam, and then the walls are sitting about 18 inches off the beam on either
Yeah.
side. So that creates the hallway that we have upstairs, and that weight can press down over time and just start pressing on that wood, which causes some humping, right? So
Yeah.
what you and we have some, like simple things like our ledger strip, which is where a joist sits at the girder, right? So it's that little 1 by 1 piece of wood that goes at the bottom of the joist and sits there. Hers is warped, and over
Yeah.
time, that's going to cause some waviness, right? And it's because it's going to change where those joists sit, across that beam. So, is it structural? Yeah, I mean, like, I guess, but at the same time, like, as long as that ledger strip's not coming off, and as long as things aren't cracking and moving, like I said, to fix that can be a big pain. But sometimes you got to look at, the post underneath. Do you have leaning piers? Do you have,
Mhm.
metal poles that are starting to bend, or starting to, hit the end of their life, or starting to rust? Those are all things that can cause humping.
Mhm.
But typically when you're looking at a house, if you feel it getting like spongy,
Yeah.
like if it's sagging and you step on it and you feel that give, then there's likely a wood issue going on underneath it. But most basement homes, most homes that are built prior to 1980 are just gonna have some of that stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they're an older home at this
Yeah.
point. Yeah. Yeah. Very, like, seriously. So, one question I've had though is just because I can't remember what the reason was. Oh gosh. When you go through a house, because I remember going in one in Asheboro and literally you just bounce.
Mhm.
What is the bouncing again? Because I can't remember like exactly like when it bounces, like it's bouncing. Because I've been in
Yeah,
a few homes lately.
I mean, in new homes especially, it's the material that's being used.
Uh,
So if you're in a newer home and you feel it being bouncy, one of the things that newer home construction is doing that, it's not a bad idea, but it does create bounce, is they're using engineered lumber to carry weight over a longer span. So the span basically, if you take a normal 2 by 8 or 2 by 10 or 2 by 12, whatever you're using is your joists,
yeah.
like that can only carry weight over a certain amount of time before it has to be braced by something else,
Yeah.
right? That's what we talk about with span.
Yeah.
So if things can only carry an 8 foot span, that means that there has to be a post here and there has to be a post 8 feet down to make sure that, that wood doesn't dip over time,
Yeah.
right? And that in older construction, that can also cause some humping in the floors too, because that, things may be overspanned and it's starting to, put pressure on it.
Yeah.
In newer homes, you're using I joists. So what looks like plywood with, wood on the other side. If you look at it,
Yeah.
it's kind of a beam where, it's thicker at the top and really skinny in the middle. So
Yeah.
super sound, can also carry a really long span, which can also
Make
make
it bouncing.
make
Okay.
that thing a little bit more.
Yeah.
Same engineered trusses,
Yeah.
uh, floor trusses and stuff like that, where you're just, it's designed to carry a really, really long span. Um, it's super, super strong. So there's like no real concern
Yeah.
over it, but it does create some of that additional bouncing.
Yeah. So in an older home though, the bounciness, because like I've been in a few and I'm like, why is this is bouncing? A
Yeah,
couple older homes. Then that's a kind of a concern, isn't it?
it can be,
Yeah.
especially if you've got like, um, it can be an indication of maybe wood damage underneath.
Yeah.
Because what ends up happening if you've got my hand motions are
Yeah.
awesome. You've got the joist, and then the subfloor sits on top
Yeah.
of it. Something happens to that wood, and it starts to pull.
Yeah.
Right? It starts sagging. It starts doing that, and that subfloor is still sitting there. That's going to create some of
Yeah.
that.
That makes sense.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
that,
That's what I thought. But that's like one of the big questions I always get, especially in older homes, like ones in the early 1900s, like in the 20s and 30s, 40s.
yeah, and I mean, like subfloors start coming apart, and the
Yeah.
nails start, doing that. So I mean, some of that bounce may not be structural. It could just be where the subfloor is starting to loosen up, and
Yeah.
nails are getting loose, and that's why you hear squeaks
Yeah.
inside. Right? So it's, there's, I feel like I'm not really answering the question because there's multiple things that
Well,
can
yeah,
cause
totally.
it.
Yeah. But I think just going over with people just that it's like it could be this and this and this because it may not be so serious. So,
Yeah.
and that's what I always let everyone know is like, yeah, we were feeling this. It is a little bit funky, but is it super serious? We have to definitely jump in and see, but it may not be serious. It just could be
And I mean,
the whole
we're
thing.
going to look at that stuff, but like that's part of the education process for the buyer too, right? Is like,
Yeah.
hey, this may not be a big deal, but here's what a home inspector is going to look for when they come here. So we go under contract. They're going to go underneath and make sure that,
Yeah.
piers aren't out of level, that it's not being, because I mean, this happens. It's not being stood up by a car jack, or stood
Yeah.
up where
Yeah.
you just have stacks and stacks and stacks of broken blocks and
Yeah.
old 2x4s, and I mean, there's all sorts of crazy things we've seen underneath old houses. But I mean, that's just education to them on this is what they're going to look at,
Yeah.
and if they find something, like, it still doesn't necessarily mean it's a super big concern, but if it is something you're concerned with, and that's kind of how you dive into, like, do you really want to buy an old house, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of people that want level perfect homes and don't want those kind of imperfections and dealing with that stuff, and like you have to look at it and be like, this is just an old house, right? Like,
Yeah.
part of owning an old house, and like there's going to be some wonky stuff in the crawl space in the basement, and you're just going to have to deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, you look at sometimes with the older houses, I mean, you're going to have to deal with those kind of issues, but then also like some of the wood they used back in the day, it was so much better. So in some senses, I mean, it may be older and there may be some weird stuff, but you might have a really good home.
Yeah, I mean, well, you aren't getting like the slap together neighborhoods like you are
Yeah.
now. So
Yeah.
some of the, I'm not going to mention builder names, but
Yeah.
like there are some larger neighborhoods that are being built at a lower price in that in 10 to 15 years are just
Oh,
gonna
yeah.
be disasters,
Yeah.
right? And like there's no way around it, and it's not, I mean, it's a business model choice, right? Like they're not designing them to last 60 years the way that
Yep.
they, but that's part of it. But I can also show you where like we've had good construction in our home, but I can also show you like where they've done stuff where you're just like, what were they
Yeah.
thinking? Right? That
Yeah.
would never happen now that happened 60 years ago. So I
Yeah.
mean, things change, things improve, they try to get efficient. You talk about affordable housing, like that's a big part of this. Like to
Yeah.
build a house to where it is super, super solid is expensive.
Exactly.
Really expensive. Like you're not going to buy in, where we live in North Carolina, like you're not going to buy a super well built house that's super, super sturdy that's going to last 80 years without a lot of structural concerns, unless you're willing to spend 600,000 plus,
I
right?
agree.
Just
Yeah.
just is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
And,
not
and
knocking anybody that's building homes less than that, right? Like
yeah.
you
Yeah.
just you can't do it. Like I've got builder friends that are like, we just can't build houses unless you're building them at scale, like those national builders we talked about. Unless you're building them at scale, you can't build them for less than 300, 350, right? It's just
Yeah.
not feasible. That builder's not going to make profit. And
Yeah.
you kind of
Well,
have.
yeah. And also it's like you gotta, I always, sometimes people will, have an opinion about that. I mean, about the lower houses and like people buying them, like, but that's what they can afford. But, I mean, I think it's like if you make them aware, I mean, like you and I would make them aware, well, this is just know in 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, and I mean, look, there's
You may
tons
have
of
issues.
homes. There's tons of homes that were built in the 60s and 70s that you see now that
Yeah.
are like kind of the same thing, right? Like just
Yeah.
the what used to be the starter homes back in the 70s and 80s, where you're like, this is rough,
Yeah.
right? And it's, I mean, it's the same principle. It's a
Exactly.
little different. The materials have changed. Like, I mean, you can look at a 2x4 now versus a 2x4 from the 1940s, and they're
Yeah.
completely right. Like, so it's part of the process, but
Exactly.
you also can't. No
Yeah.
one, not everybody can buy $1 million homes. So
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So you kind of got to go your price point, but yeah, for sure. As long as you make people aware that, they might have issues in 10 or 15 years, but not,
and
major.
every home does. I mean, it's not
Yeah.
like I can tell you plenty of $1 million houses that we've inspected that have major structural concerns, right? Like it's
No, it's just
not there
normal.
done anything.
Yeah. 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 Because I mean, I sold a house in the sixes just the last couple of years, and I was surprised with even with that builder that, even there was issues, and I was like, wow, so I mean, there can be issues at any price point for sure. So I was going to move on to like crawl spaces. What do you feel like are the top things you should check when you're inspecting a crawl space, or what do you guys and check?
So I mean, yeah, we're looking at we're looking at way more things than a typical homeowner is going to look at, right? So I mean,
Yeah.
we're the foundation wall, making sure there's no cracking. We're looking at wood moisture content. So if you get a $20, $30 moisture meter at Lowe's and you're testing the wood under there, making sure that it's less than 20%.
Mhm.
At 20% and above is when you get concerns for wood rot, for termites, molds. You start getting up at 23 to 25%. You can start getting wood destroying fungus,
Okay.
which is a whole different animal.
Mhm.
So like you have like surface mold that you can like write your name in type thing, but
Yeah.
when you get like 25% and above, you start getting this like white, yellow, blue mold in there that will actually actively destroy your wood.
Uh-huh.
So surface mold, usually not that big of a deal. It's a health concern for sure. It's also, you know, an indication that moisture is getting there, but you want to make sure that that's not super elevated. So, we're looking, we're certified by the state to do termite inspections. So we do, we're looking for termites. We're looking at how the piers are. We're looking at all the bearing points
Yeah.
to make sure that, things are shimmed. Because like sometimes like bounce on the floor you talked about, like we've been in houses where, the joists are running across the pier, but you typically have shims to make sure that that wood is touching. And sometimes you don't have a shim there and it's just
Yeah.
leaving some bounce to it, right? Not a
Yeah.
big deal. You can fix that really easy, but so we're looking at that. We're looking at plumbing. We're looking to make sure there's no leaks. There's no indication of leaks. Looking behind doors and entryways underneath where we're pulling insulation back to making sure like leaking's not coming in that way. Water's a big part of it, making sure there's not loose electric wires. But I think like if you own a home that has a crawl space or you were touring homes that have crawl spaces,
Yeah.
the things that I would look at is I would bring a flashlight with me. And you can tell a lot just by shining a flashlight in there, right? So if I'm looking at a crawl space now, if I were a realtor showing a house, I would carry a flashlight with me and I would carry maybe a moisture meter with me. And granted, I'd probably kill a lot of my own deals if I was a realtor, but the things that I would look at are, shining your flashlight in the crawl space.
Mhm.
Does it have a vapor barrier? That plastic that goes across the ground.
Yeah.
Uh, that is an absolute must in North Carolina. You get in some of the coastal areas and where things are really sandy,
Yeah.
it's going to absorb a lot of that moisture. So you don't need the vapor barrier the way that you do here, right? Like we're in central North Carolina with a lot of clay.
Yes.
You have to have that vapor barrier down, or else that ground moisture is just going to go straight into the wood. Um,
Yeah.
so vapor barrier, you're looking at insulation quality. So if that insulation is starting to get stringy, if it's starting to
Yeah.
down, that's indication of a moisture issue. Looking at the wood, does it look clean? Does it look like, if it looks like kind of grayish and has a bunch of spots on it, camel crickets are another one where
Yeah.
like camel crickets are indication that
Yep.
it's wet, right? Um,
Yeah.
and you're just looking for like, hey, is there standing water in the crawl space? You can test the wood moisture as soon as you go in. But indications like that are going to tell you like what the probable condition is of the house. Doesn't mean that there's not issues, doesn't mean that if you're seeing those issues that it's not that bad, or maybe it's been remedied. But if you are looking at a crawl space that doesn't have a vapor barrier, or you're seeing insulation stringing down, or the wood quality doesn't look that good, the chances of that home inspection report coming back super scary goes exponentially up,
I agree.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely agree with you. Or puddles in the crawl space.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
in encapsulated crawl spaces, like people are like, oh, well, it's encapsulated, so it's not that big of a deal. Like leaks happen.
Yeah.
And sometimes like ground moisture gets up through a tape seam and you have puddles in there, which is going to get into the wood, right?
Yeah. Yeah, totally, totally. I agree with that. And I've seen that. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes the encapsulation causes so many other problems. So, I mean, I think the encapsulation is great, but then on the other hand, there's so many issues that you can have with encapsulating your crawl space. Um,
100%.
how often should a homeowner inspect their crawl space? Or should
Once
they
a
call you
quarter.
once a quarter? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah,
And,
that's
and by inspecting, I mean like if you want the different stages on what you can do, right? So I mean, we just talked about like shining
yeah,
a flashlight in it, like that for the average homeowner, that's fine.
yeah,
You start seeing puddling, if you start seeing um, insulation hanging down, if you see, things getting a little off or
yeah.
different than what you saw before, that's the chance to call somebody out to take a look.
Hmm.
If you feel like you're a little bit more adventurous, crawl the crawl space and make sure you don't have any puddles, right?
Yeah,
So, like my father-in-law loves crawling his crawl space, or his old crawl space.
yeah,
The one he's got now, they live in 1800s house and it's like this big. So
yeah,
he doesn't get that one, but he used to get in the other one, which was big. It wasn't really a crawl space, like you could waddle through there,
yeah.
but he would go in there all the time because he was in a flood area, and he would look at stuff, and he discovered that his shower pan was leaking.
Oh,
Um,
wow. Yeah,
so there are so many issues that can be discovered that can turn into huge issues down the road, that if you just
yeah,
crawl space to see puddling and all that stuff is pretty easy. The third step above that is making sure that you're getting that free termite inspection from your pest company once a year,
yeah,
because they'll crawl the crawl space for you and they will let you know if they see anything weird, right? They're not structural people. They're looking at termites, they're looking at bugs, but they are looking, because they're looking for wood destroying insects, they're also looking at moisture issues. Most pest companies are getting into moisture control, so they're going to look a lot at how that's done. Now you have to be careful because they're doing it for free, because they're going to try to sell you something.
yeah,
And that, like, I mean, that's life and that's business. Like there's nothing wrong with that.
yeah,
But we typically, if you are outside of a real estate transaction, it's always a good idea to bring us in like once every 1 to 3 years, just to make sure that your house isn't doing something that you need to know about.
yeah,
But to me, like we're going to be the most expensive option. We're going to be for the most the most anal retentive OCD type people that just want to keep everything tight. But I mean, I
yeah.
can also tell you how many times we've seen $10,000 to $20,000 issues in crawl spaces that the seller had zero idea of.
Wow.
And if we had crawled their crawl space once a year, would have saved them $20,000, right? It
Yeah,
would a $500 fix that they could have done. So, I mean, we're not the free option. But at the same point, like we're going to see stuff that's going to allow you to prevent the $20,000 fix that you're going to have to do 5 years down the road.
Yeah. Well, and just the fact that just I don't think people realize that they can use you like that, and I mean, because I think people sometimes, so we mention that a lot to our sellers and buyers because I don't think they think, oh, just a home inspection, only while you're buying a home. But I think it's something that we need to just keep educating our sellers on and buyers actually, just to get the house inspected periodically by you guys because you are there to look at so many different things.
And and anybody that's watching this, like that's something that we've tried to pitch, right?
Yeah,
And um, the offer's not quite right. So, I think like just a standard home inspection is not getting everybody excited about I'm going to spend $500 of my expendable income
yeah,
getting the home inspector out to give me like to tell me that basically a whole bunch of little things is wrong, which I already knew about, right? So, if you're watching this and you have ideas and that's value to you, find Home Team Triad on Facebook or Instagram and message us, and we'd love to hear what those ideas are. Because I mean, I think there's definitely an option there, probably tied in with some sort of other service that is brought to the house. But it's easier for us to inspect once we've already inspected it once,
yeah.
right?
The
Um,
house. So, and you also
you
have like the first,
compare and contrast, and
yeah, you've got all like the beginning pictures and so on, and you can actually document it throughout the
yeah,
journey of the life
for
of the
sure.
house for that
which
buyer or
which
seller.
also gets into like increasing the lifetime value of I mean, if you're treating the house like an asset,
Mhm.
like that's part of it, right? Like
Yeah.
spending $2,500 over the course of you living there for 5 years, 6 years, and that saves you against a $20,000 repair.
I think it's a big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, I really do. Like when you're looking at things, I mean, you could if you could stop it early, or find it early for
But
sure.
that's just, that's my biased opinion of me standing
Yeah.
on the soapbox and doing all that. So we're
Yeah.
we're here, we're here to help is the point. But
Yeah.
um, if there are things that we can do that people that are watching this would like to see, even if you're from out of the area, like
Yeah.
I'd hear about it.
Yeah, definitely. So with I know that you've got to go, so you've got some appointments, but so we can wrap this up. What's the most surprising or most severe issue you've seen in a crawl space or a basement lately?
So I mean, typically in a crawl space, it's going to be unchecked moisture, and
Yeah.
um, I mean, we've probably the craziest crawl space. I mean, we've been in some nasty stuff,
Yeah.
right? Sewer lines disconnected where it's just dumping
Uh,
underneath. That one that I talked about, $20,000 issue with seller had no idea that,
yeah.
puddle his shower drain was disconnected and was basically just dumping water for years and ended up causing structural cracks.
Oh,
But we did a house a couple years ago where termites had eaten up the joist so bad that it was basically like if this is what a normal piece of wood looks like, that it looked like that.
oh,
And so our guy was in the crawl space, and unfortunately, the buyer's boyfriend, and the agent were all severely overweight, and they were standing on there, and the wood was literally cracking
oh, oh,
for walking through the house
oh,
to the point where our inspector got out and was like, "I can't be under there." Um,
yeah.
that is rare. That's in the 0.1% of houses that we see, right? It's not a common thing. Like when we say like your house is falling down, like we've done 11,000 inspections and maybe there's like two
Yeah.
where we're like, yeah, this might fall down. That was one of them. Basement is just like probably one of the craziest things I've seen was just like a couple weeks ago where there had been so much movement in the foundation, and it was a townhome where the basement floor had basically just sloped down to the point to where there was a wall in the basement that was no longer bearing on the floor. Like
Oh,
you take the wall and shake it, and
oh,
it had a 2 inch clearance between
oh, wow.
the wall and the floor. Like it just wasn't bearing anymore. Now it wasn't a load bearing wall, but at the same time, like they're not supposed to be free floating either, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
That's
that's
crazy.
that was one that I hadn't seen before, where I was like, I can't believe that we can actually take a finished basement and move move the structure.
Yeah. 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 The craziest one I went into, and I declined that listing, was a few years ago. This for sale by owner wanted us to list his house, and we got there, and it was kind of weird. Like, just, I was like, no way, this has been like empty for 6 months. But and there was like a bird, and we had to get the bird out of this one room, and I'm like, this is weird. And then we start going downstairs, and he puts on a mask, and I'm like, this is kind of weird. And we get down there, and I'm looking around, and I'm like, there's like black mold
Yeah.
everywhere in the basement. And I look over, and I'm like, okay, there's snakes. I know there's snakes because I could see like the holes in the crawl space portion of it.
Yep.
And I'm like, okay, I'm out of here. And then all of a sudden, I mean, they're just like, it's heavy, like the walls are caving in from the black mold. And then Chad walks through this one room, and the snake like jumps out at him. I'm already like taking off. I'm upstairs and I'm out. I'm like, and we're like, sir, you should probably take that offer you have. We are not listing your house. We're
And
like,
we've been in some homes where, I mean, you walk in and can't breathe.
oh yeah,
And from
gosh,
mold type stuff. I mean, we've seen crazy kind of structural repairs on
yeah,
wall. I mean, we've had walls that are bowing like this, right?
oh
Like
gosh,
there's definitely been some where we're like, this wall's like, they're like, we got structural repairs done. I'm like, yeah, it still might fail. Uh,
yeah,
but I mean, if it makes people feel comfortable too, like I've talked to structural engineers about it that have been doing it for 20, 30 years and have only seen one or two wall failures in their entire career. So like
yeah.
again,
That's good to know.
we're talking about a very, very, very small chance of something like that happening. But it's still out there, right?
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. And you're gonna have run into crazy houses like that, and ones that you tell them to sell on their own. Um,
That,
life happens. We don't that doesn't
or
happen.
to call the 80% cash offer guys, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's actually what we told them to do.
Yeah.
Because we're like, that's a better deal for you. But Drew, thank you so much for coming on and talking about, crawl spaces and basements and moisture and all the fun things all the questions that people have that seem really overwhelming to the average buyer or seller. We appreciate, again, you coming on, talking about them, and kind of, letting everyone know that maybe they're not as crazy or as scary as they seem.
No,
But
I mean, it definitely seems scary, and
yeah,
some of the issues are scary, and I understand why it gets people there. But I think like with anything
understanding.
else, when it comes to buying a house and going through the inspection process, is everything's fixable,
Yeah,
and just because it pops up on an inspection report doesn't mean that it's a I have to fix this or my house is going to fall down.
exactly.
Um, that's what contractors are for. That's what engineers are for, to help guide you through that, and realizing that like there's either a fix or maintenance or just monitoring. And when you kind of like divide that out and dig in and do your due diligence on it, it's not usually anything out of the ordinary.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. And just being educated on it helps for sure. It makes it less scary. Well, thank you again so much. And I know you got to go because you've got some appointments today, but I hope you come on again. We talk about something fun. And thank you again for coming on. And I will have all of Drew's information below. So if you have any questions, you can definitely reach out to me and I will get them to Drew, or I will, or you can reach out to him directly. And like, again, I said, like, we'll get all his information down below.
Cool.
Thanks.
Thanks, Gary.
Bye.